Hi YouTube, welcome to a new video. In this video, I am taking you through a framework that I use to help find the next startup idea that I'll pursue. I like to call this the Goldilocks zone, and as part of this, I'm going to take you through two different graphs that basically encapsulate my thinking and how I go about trying to find an idea. The first graph here looks at the ability or ease of execution, as well as the average contract size, either low or high. The second graph looks at how easy or hard it is to replace the application that you're building, and then whether that is seen by your customers as costing money or helping make money. And yes, that Goldilocks zone is purposely skewed towards the help make money side. Now, some important considerations. This is predominantly done through the lens of more B2B SaaS based applications. It might not be as applicable if you're doing consumer apps, marketplaces, etc., but that's not really where my focus is. So to provide some additional context, and this is really important because the Goldilocks zone is going to be different for everyone. For example, if you're a computer science, if you have a computer science PhD, you're going to have a different reference point when it comes to the difficulty to execute. When I show the graph, I'm going to use an example of like healthcare software or defense software. If you're someone who's worked at the NSA, CIA, and has a computer science PhD, again, your reference point for how easy or hard it is to execute software in that particular industry is going to be different to me or the average person. I think also one of the other things to take into consideration is that very few apps are seen to either perfectly make money or cost money. Instead, I think you should think of it through the lens of the apps that help make those things happen. So for example, if you're running an e-commerce store, the fact that you sell e-commerce software doesn't directly make that person selling that widget money. It's actually someone buying that widget, but without the e-commerce store, they wouldn't be able to facilitate that transaction online. So it's more of the app is helping facilitate those things. And as I mentioned before, I purposely skew the Goldilocks zone closer to the area that is seen to make a company money. The reason why I do this is that if a company ever needs to cut costs, they're more likely to cut expenses in areas that don't directly generate revenue. So again, underlying the directly generate part, a good example of this, in my day job, the company I work for, we have a SaaS solution that allows us to exchange points that we earn in terms of getting good feedback, and those points can be exchanged for gift cards and other things like that. Now, if for whatever reason we needed to cut costs, I'm pretty sure they're going to cut that that application before they get rid of our CRM or some other tool that's really important to us as a sales team. So with that out of the way, I'm going to jump over and get a look at these two graphs and throw some examples on the board. So first of all, as I said, you've got this kind of quadrant which looks at how easy or how hard it is to execute. That's predominantly the way I'm looking at this. So for example, up here in the kind of top corner, I mentioned, defense software, right? Or another example here is like healthcare software. If you're making software that is used by hospitals, the procurement cycle for that is going to be very long because, typically it might be a government entity that's purchasing it or a very large organization. There's going to be obviously compliance requirements because you're handling sensitive data. Same thing with defense software, right? Very, very hard to execute because just of the hoops that you need to jump through and the expertise that you need to have. Again, though, as I mentioned before, this is all within the context of your own reference point. So if you are someone who works for the NSA and has a PhD in software engineering or computer science, your ability to execute on this project might be a lot easier and you might pull it down here. But this is my reference point. Now, the benefit, though, of having a hard to execute idea is that the barrier to entry is obviously exceptionally high and the average contract value is also exceptionally high. So, maybe even skew these more over here. When you do if you're a salesperson selling these applications, you're doing deals at millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, not $10 per user per month. Now, it's important to point out here, where I say high revenue potential, I'm talking about the average contract size. So the reason why that's an important distinction is someone's going to jump up and down and be like, hey, but there's companies that sell, software relatively cheap and they've made a lot of money, right? Like example would be Trello. They had like these plans where it was $9, $10, $15 per user. They got acquired by Atlassian a number of years back for $500 million. You have MailChimp, which started, selling at $20, $30, $40, $50 a month. I'm sure they've got enterprises who spend tens of thousands of dollars with them a month, but the average contract size is what I'm kind of referring to on this axis here. So if these are kind of hard to execute ideas with very limited competition, what are some easy to execute ideas? Well, I think, and I'm no disrespect to anyone who's executing down here, and a couple of these ideas I've done myself, but like a simple task management app is definitely easy to execute, especially with AI these days. I've built a task management application before. I ran it for a number of years. I successfully sold that business. But because it's easy to execute, there's obviously a lot of competition, and because there's also a lot of competition, there's also a low average contract size. Again, all things relative. There are obviously some task management applications that are trying to push into enterprise. Maybe they do have slightly higher contracts as they kind of go up market over time. Asana would be an example of that. Monday.com would be an example of that, and they're pushing into like use of CRMs. But in terms of my reference point, I would put something like task management here. Something that might have, higher revenue potential, not quite as hard as defense or healthcare software, could be something like a CRM. That's a really good example. Obviously, there's very dominant players like Salesforce, Microsoft, but there have been companies that have come along in the past and continue to emerge that are maybe approaching it from a different way. So Pipedrive would be an example, very much focused on just sales teams, a CRM, or industry-specific CRMs. Potentially higher revenue contract, higher average value, but if you're going industry specific, not as many bells and whistles, it might pull it back to here. So when I look at this, obviously you don't want anything that's up in this quadrant, right? Like if we, let's get like a rectangle. Oh, come on. Why can't I grab you? Let's make this red. If you had an idea that's hard to execute and low revenue potential, it doesn't really sound like a good idea to me, right? Maybe it's a little bit more like this and then skewed that way, but I'm not going to bother with that. Equally, with my skill set, I don't want something that's super hard to execute, because the other challenge that you have is that the sales cycles for these software, it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years, and obviously, as a bootstrap startup founder, it's not where I want to play. Equally, though, if there's something that's super high revenue potential but very easy to execute, it's not going to stay that way for a really long time, because obviously if it's got high revenue potential and it's easy to execute, more competitors are going to flood in, and that's going to make this, let's call this like short-lived potential, right? So when I think about this space, I would say like this kind of space is, for example, if you're early mover to a new industry or use case, you could get some early advantage, and that could be very beneficial, and then it might end up shifting that it becomes lower average revenue, and the ability to execute does become harder because you need more features, right? Because it's more competitive, so to differentiate, and you kind of end up moving into the Goldilocks zone. But you don't want to be, what I would say, like this is short-lived. So you either have to be an early entrant and ability to move really, really quickly, and expect that this is going to have to shift over time. So when I'm thinking about ideas, what I really want is something that sits in this Goldilocks zone, right? I don't want something super hard to execute, because I am a solo founder. I do have a bit of a technical background, but if you've watched my other videos, I'll peg them kind of at a junior developer side. Equally though, I don't want to go too easy to execute, because there might be more competition. I don't want something that's $5 per user per month. I've been there, I've done that, I've created software in that space. And equally, I don't want something that's going to be, 12, 18, 24 month sales cycles. So I need to find something that sits in this Goldilocks zone. So that's on the execution side. Then the way I look at this quadrant is, how easy or hard is it to replace your application once it's in place? And then also, does this application, is it seen to cost money or make money? So if I just quickly copy this down and bring this down here. On the previous slide deck, I talked about that example of like an employee perks application. You can log in, you can exchange points that you get for doing a good job in your role for vouchers. Now within a business, that's definitely seen to cost money, and it's pretty easy to remove, because if you don't want it, you just turn it off, and that company's going to save money. Now I know some of you will argue, but then employee satisfaction will go down, and in the long run it'll cost the company money because they'll lose their good employees. Sometimes, when the writing's on a wall at a company and they're in trouble and they need to cut costs, like they're thinking about surviving the next 6 months, 12 months, not, hey, are we going to retain our employees for the next 5 years, right? So keep that in mind. Then, if I copy this, one of the things that's probably actually hard to replace, and it is good actually if you can get up in this quadrant. I'm not saying this quadrant's bad. This would be something like a CRM, and it's definitely seen to make money. The problem is, similar to this quadrant, or even upper bound of this, is like this space here. If we put a circle like this, highly competitive. Make that a little bit bigger. Let's make this like orange. So, layer, center back. Like this space could actually be quite competitive, right? Like if something's really hard to replace, like a CRM, if you've got an organization that's had a CRM for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then you're trying to replace it with a new one, there's a lot of work that goes into that. Obviously the contract value is then high, but this space can also be seen to be highly competitive. And again, everyone's Goldilocks zone is different. If you're a startup founder who's got the ability to go and raise, a bunch of money in an early stage round, and you can go and hire enough people, and you can go and do enough marketing, you can compete in this space. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a bad space to be. This is highly competitive, right? And I'm not that person. Everyone's Goldilocks zone is different. I'm a solo founder. I don't have access to, a $5 million pre-seed round to get things going. All right, so let's continue with this. So then also, if something's seen to cost money and is hard to replace, what's an example of that? That could be something like, probably again on the HR side, right? Like expense management. I mean, it's not super hard to replace, but something that's like expense management that ties into other systems. So you've got integrations into your other HR systems, right? Like that could be an example. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to try and replace all of that. It's kind of seen as a bit of a cost center, but you kind of need it. You know, that could be an example there. And then obviously if you've got something that's easy to replace and helps make money, this has got potential too, but again, it's probably, I mean, actually this whole side's probably highly competitive, to be honest. But I won't put that then again there. And also I think if something's easy to replace helps make a company money, the other thing that you're going to get is, if we use an arrow, you're going to get that same kind of shift. You can get that same kind of shift up, not down, up, right? Like over time, if something's easy to replace, competitors can go, hey, we can make a piece of software, we can go after this market. It's very easy for them to move off of one solution onto another, and we can, you know, it'll basically become more competitive over time. And maybe you end up having to build out more features, more functionality to be competitive and differentiate. And then because you have more features and more functionality, you become harder to replace and you shift up. So again, when I'm thinking through this, I want something in the Goldilocks zone. I want to try and create a solution that is seen as helping an organization make money. I don't want something that's too easy to replace. I don't want something that's too hard to remove because then we get too competitive. So I'm thinking about ideas that sit in this space. Now, I do have an idea that I am going to pursue. I'll give you a hint in that it's related to my professional experience, which is around working in enterprise sales and with enterprise sales teams. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link in the description down below where I introduce the idea on my new channel where I'm building a brand new startup, 100% live, 100% in real time. So if you're interested in following that journey, check out the link down below and let me know what you think about kind of my thought process here with the Goldilocks zone and where and how hard I think each of these different quadrants are. Happy to hear from other people, happy to facilitate some discussion, and I'll catch you in the next one. So thanks for watching.